Welcome to Module 58 of AP Environmental Science, and this module is all about risk assessment and risk analysis, which is really important because you are unconsciously doing this every second of every day. You have to determine what is an acceptable level of risk for walking out of your front door to go to school. Whether is it an acceptable level of risk to walk to school or to drive to school or to take the bus to school. You are doing this risk assessment unconsciously all the time on every single decision that you make. Now, in environmental science, when there's an environmental hazard, so anything that could potentially cause harm either to the environment or to a person, to your health, to the health of a particular flower in a valley, an environmental scientist has to determine, is that an acceptable level of risk for that particular activity? Now, oftentimes, our judgments are based off of perceptions, and they're not based off of actual data and facts. So, for example, I do not like flying on airplanes. I do it because I have to get from A to B in order to visit family that live out of state. But I do not enjoy it at all, because in my head, flying on an airplane is much riskier than driving in a car. Now, if you look at the actual data, the risk of dying in an airplane accident is 1 in 9,821. That's really not that bad. If you look at the risk of dying in a car accident, that's 1 in 114. You are way more likely to get into a car accident than you are to be in an airplane accident. People who are afraid of dogs because they're afraid of dog bites, that's a really disjointed perception. The perception of getting bit by a dog versus the reality do not line up. Just like my perception of being injured in a plane crash versus being in a car crash, they don't line up with the actual data. And that's something that we see in humans across the board. Oftentimes, our qualitative and our quantitative risk assessments are not lined up. So in science, we like to use numbers. You are much more likely to see a quantitative assessment in environmental science, and that holds true with risk assessments. And it's a pretty simple equation. You take the probability of being exposed to a hazard times the probability of being harmed if you're actually exposed. So for example, the probability of getting sick from eating peanut butter, because there's a fungus that could be on some peanuts that are used to make peanut butter, can cause cancer. So the probability of being exposed to that hazard, I mean, you might eat peanut butter every day, okay? So you're probably got a pretty high number there, but your chance of being harmed if exposed. If you're exposed to that, the chances of being exposed to that peanut butter, your chances of getting cancer from that fungus that might be there is really small. And so that is something where it's a very common event that has a low likelihood of causing harm. That could be the exact same level of risk of a rare event that has a high likelihood of causing harm, such as dying in a plane crash. There's a chance that those two things can be equal. And in fact, those examples have the exact same likelihood of 1 in 1 million. It's probably not going to happen. Risk assessments use a whole bunch of studies to build that data set. So it uses chronic and acute dose-response studies. It also uses retrospective studies, so looking back at the past at some event that happened and seeing how people reacted to that or organisms reacted to that, and by using prospective studies, so kind of looking forward. Once you get that data, so once you determine what the risk is, you have to decide, is that risk acceptable? Now, the EPA has decided, for the most part, a 1 in 1 million risk is okay. As long as you can reduce it down so that way your chance of getting sick or dying or getting injured or whatnot is 1 in 1 million, the EPA says, all right, that's good enough. We're not going to have to reduce it anymore because that chance is pretty small. Now not everybody agrees that a 1 in 1 million chance of death from radiation from a leak at a nuclear power plant is okay. Other people are like, yeah, you know, I'll take a 1 in 1 million chance, so that way every time I turn on my light switch, it's going to be there. The job of risk management, of deciding what is an appropriate level of risk, is the job of regulators at local, state, and national levels. And they have to balance this risk that people are taking with the cost involved in reducing that overall risk. So sometimes it takes a lot of money to take that risk from a 1 in 1 million to a 1 in 2 million. That might take a ton of money. And is it really going to make that much of a difference? Is that really a good use of money? Now, when you look around the world, there's two approaches to risk assessment and risk management. The United States uses one method, everywhere else in the world uses the other. The innocent until proven guilty principle. This is the idea that it is the burden of the consumer to determine if something is safe or not. So industry does research, they do a little bit of pre-market testing, but then they give it out to consumers. Now, if that product's found unsafe, industry doesn't have to do anything. They already got approval. They're already producing it. A good example is smoking and vape devices. The tobacco industry and the companies that are producing these do not have to prove that particular device and that particular product is harmful or safe. They're just making a product. It is the burden of the consumer to prove that that particular product is harmful before any regulatory institution will come in and say you can no longer sell that or put restrictions and regulations on it. Everywhere else in the world uses the precautionary principle, where it is the burden of the company to prove that the product is safe before selling it to consumers. And if it's proved to not be fully safe, they need to put a label on it. They need to clearly identify that particular product as not being safe. So the United States uses innocent until proven guilty. Everywhere else uses a precautionary. It's important to understand the difference between these two and the implication it has on the environment and human health. Another good example is DDT. DDT is a chemical that causes the eggshells of birds to get very, very thin. So thin that when the bird goes to sit on the nest to incubate the eggs, the weight of the bird is actually going to crush the eggs. Now, the industry did not have to prove that their product was safe before putting it on the market. It was the responsibility of the consumers and of environmental activists to prove that DDT was harmful. So that they were innocent until they were proven very guilty of causing harm. Just like tobacco industry with smoking, just like the vaping industry today. Now, it wasn't always this way, and it's not always going to be this way. In 2001, the Stockholm Convention took place. And this is when 127 countries came together and they created this list. It was called the Dirty Dozen. And it was a whole bunch of chemicals that these countries decided needed to be banned, phased out, or significantly reduced. All of the chemicals on that Dirty Dozen list are what are called endocrine disruptors. Now, countries have met again more recently, and that list, it's more than 12 now, we're up to 32. Like I said before, not everywhere in the world uses this innocent until proven guilty mindset. The precautionary principle is very much alive and well in the EU. They have this process called REACH: registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemicals. So before a chemical or product can come out to the market, it has to be subjected to rigorous risk assessment to determine that this is actually safe before it goes out into the public hands. And by doing that, they've actually been able to avoid a lot of the issues that we've had here in the United States. Now, I know that's a lot to digest. I hope you take some really good notes. Again, really great working towards sustainability, since this is one at the end of the chapter. And let me know what your questions are in class.